Hey, sweetie.
Hey!
I think we're reading The Valley Run.
We are. I could hardly contain my excitement.
Really?
Really.
This is an exciting part.
It is an exciting part. But it's your turn, so there you are.
Hi, everybody.
Howdy.
I'm Drake.
I'm McTrowell.
We're going to read from the Bavarian Airship Regatta, and we're getting to some very exciting parts. This is the second leg of the race, and it's called The Valley Run. Like many... Oh, I forgot my hat. Okay. Here we go.
Are you now fully attired, my dear?
Yes.
All right.
I'm ready. Like many of the non-crew, Chief Inspector Erasmus Drake had been watching the race from the common room that was the dining area just the evening before. As Krashnaya Rabashka's outcry, he realized that the race was over and sprinted to the outside door leading to the catwalk. Overlooking the railing, he peered down at the excited crowd just a few hundred feet below. The racing official, with a large flag, started waving it wildly, signaling the completion of the leg. The crowd, pressed in tight, shoulder to shoulder, all raised their arms and shouted in victory. Erasmus thought, even with their political differences, the people of Salzburg must see themselves as Bavarians, so the Iron Eagle winning this leg is a huge win for them. Lord Ashley and J.B. Fox soon arrived by his side, also leaning over the rail to see the reaction of the townsfolk. Before either of them had an opportunity to comment, Sparky's voice could be heard over the voice pipe. All three men retreated back into the airship common room to hear her announcement. And given the challenges of the course and the competitors, placing a close second is an excellent start to the regatta. I understand, as well as all of you, that this race is far from over. Please be aware that we have followers in the crowd down there in Salzburg, as well as the press, and they will see each and every one of us as members of our crew. When you are on the ground, please take care to always show your great enthusiasm for our finishing in second place. The Western and Transatlantic Airship Lines appreciate your cooperation. Personally, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to take the lead tomorrow. I hope you all are with me on this endeavor. Thank you. Very political of her. Erasmus looked around the room, expecting to see the surprised expressions on those who knew Sparky. But there weren't any. He realized that a side of her that he had not previously seen had just been exposed, that she had a great amount of discipline when under pressure, and realized that childish emotions do not a great leader make. Lord Ashley turned to Erasmus and flatly stated, "That was far too exciting. I'm stepping into my cabin for a spot of chai. Care to join me?" Erasmus wasn't really in the mood for a hot beverage, and instead thought he might see if he could spend a moment with Sparky. "I much appreciate the offer, my good friend, but I'm going to tend to my duties and make sure that the crew is safe during our docking." Lord Ashley smiled politely, executed a small bow, and retreated to his cabin. Erasmus was sure that his excuse did not fool his friend, who knew his true reason. As it turned out, the finish line was on the front edge of the airfield of Salzburg. To the port side of the Birkenheer was the Salzach River, and in front of them, on the starboard side, was Monchburg Mountain topped by
Festung Hohensalzburg,
the grand Holzenbogard Castle. A very impressive sight, particularly when viewed from the sky at eye level. Beyond the airfield were the town cathedrals. The airfield in front of them had only been made to accommodate one airship at a time on a permanent basis. However, 4 additional towers have been temporarily erected to accommodate the regatta competitors. The Iron Eagle was being flagged towards the permanent tower, perhaps due to their placement in the first leg of the regatta, or perhaps because they were the Bavarian entry. Either way, they had earned their place of honor. The rest of the airships followed the waving of their associated country's flag at the top of their temporary wooden towers. As the airships carefully descended to moor, the crowd rushed over to meet them. And by the time the crew and the Burke and Hare descended their tower, the crowd of well-wishers was so thick that they couldn't descend the final steps and were halted in the stairwell, waving to the throng. It had become clear that every resident of Salisbury had come out to see the conclusion of the first regatta leg, and they had been joined by others who had gotten there by other means. The majority of the shouts from the audience were a mishmash of incomprehensible German to the ears of Erasmus. A brass band struck up in the distance, and the crowd seemed to ease back a bit. This allowed the English-speaking newspaper reporters to come to the fore, pencils in hand, shouting questions to Sparky. It suddenly occurred to Erasmus that the fact that Sparky was the only female pilot in the regatta made her an instant celebrity. Sparky handled each of their questions as she slowly descended the staircase, allowing her crew to get by. Erasmus and J.B. were surreptitiously armed to the teeth. It was somewhat amazing that they didn't clank as they walked, given the revolvers, swords, and knives that each had hidden in various locations on their person. Erasmus and J.B. scanned the crowd, but didn't see any immediate danger. Erasmus and J.B. scanned the crowd, but didn't see any immediate danger. One unexpected incident happened, though. When Jake entered the throng, he was approached by an enthusiastic young lady who asked him, in broken English, if he had just disembarked from the Burke and Hare. He innocently replied, yes, to which she threw her arms around him and gave him an incredible forceful kiss, followed by, "Mine parents are from England land, and they live here. Yes, we cheer for you. So proud." She followed this proclamation with an excited little hop, followed by another big hug, which actually picked Jake off the ground by a few inches. Jake was, as expected, speechless. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "Please me by staying here. I get parents of mine. Please stay." She then turned and burrowed her way through the crowd. Jake turned to his father. He just smiled at him and slowly shook his head. Sparky had just finished up with one of the reporters. "I thought it was a fair race. The Iron Eagle did well on defense throughout the leg and made a clean break for the finish line. My only regret is that in our final maneuver, we should have zigged when we zagged, leaving us at a close second. We're looking forward to the remainder of the regatta." "Thank you, Dr. McTrowell." The reporter seemed pleased with this, scribbling quickly, dramatically finishing with a period, and disappearing into the crowd to probably send in his article by telegraph. The band suddenly changed tunes and, at the central podium, Herr Zimmermann called for the pilots to approach. Erasmus and J.B. followed Sparky. The podium was set up in a classic tiered pyramid for awards, with 5 locations for the 5 pilots. The front of the podium had the Salzburg crest. Herr Zimmermann announced the names of the airships and pilots, starting with the 5th place finisher, the North Wind, piloted by Bjorn Svensson. The tall blonde Swede proudly took the podium, waving wildly at the crowd. Despite having come in last in the first leg, the crowd roared with enthusiasm. Herr Zimmermann then called for Pierre de Garde of Les Lapins to take his rightful place on the podium. Again the crowd cheered. Philippe Garza of El Toro Rojo was called up to take the 3rd position, and he humbly ascended to the podium and bowed to the crowd. Again, a cheer went up. Sparky did her best to hide the rolling of her eyes. Finishing a close second, the Burke and Hare, piloted by none other than the illustrious Dr. Sparky McTrowell. Again the crowd roared, but with the interesting distinction that the ladies' voices could clearly be heard. As Sparky turned to face the crowd, she removed her signature airship pilot's headgear and waved it in the air, smiling broadly to the crowd. And in first place, our very own Captain Willie Dampf, piloting the Iron Eagle. Willie took a half step towards the podium, But then 2 large members of his own crew hoisted him up onto their shoulders and carried him to the high central position of the pyramid-shaped podium. He turned and smiled brightly, waving his arms. The crowd roared enthusiastically. Each competitor was handed a rolled-up colored flag to add to the back of their airship to indicate their positions in the regatta. The pilots tucked their flags underneath their arms and waved to the crowd for the last time while on the podium. The band struck up a lively tune that clearly indicated to everyone that the festivities had concluded, and it was time for all good citizens to seek their dinner and to discuss the intricacies of the regatta. And then there's a break. A dinner for the airship crews had been prepared in the oldest part of town at the Stiftkeller St. Peter. Each airship crew was provided with a large table, and a suitable Bavarian feast was brought out, starting with garlic and goulash soup, the main course being pig shank with sauerkraut, and finishing with Wiener Apfelstrudel. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, me too.
Erasmus noted that Reginald Wallace had not joined the crew at the table. He was less concerned about the political shenanigans that Wallace was probably involved in while he was out and about, and more concerned about his safety. The owner of an airship line would be an excellent high-profile target to someone who wanted to interfere with the regatta or who was planning to kidnap him for ransom. But Erasmus's priority was to stay here and protect those from the Burke and Hare who had joined in for dinner. Aldrich and Jake Fremont were there. Lord Ashley was also there. Much to the surprise of Erasmus, Virat was seated as a guest. It was interesting to see someone else serving Virat. He was exceedingly polite and was able to get through the meal without uttering a sound save a few hummings of approval. The talk during the meal at the Burke and Hare table was jovial, but not high-spirited. Jake was able to add to the tales by saying that when the father of the last met him, she was more subdued in her excitement, but still gave the impression that Jake was the prize at the end of the race. In comparison, the conversation at El Toro Rojo table was bordering on secretive with all their conspiratorial whisperings. At the Iron Eagle table, it was clear to even Erasmus's untrained ear that the final seconds of the first leg was being told and retold many times, with the crew members trading off tales of their expertise, patting each other on the back, and pouring goblets of wine for each other. To close the evening out, a quartet played Mozart pieces during dessert, starting with a quiet and sweet aria from Don Giovanni, followed by a livelier tune from the Magic Flute, and finishing with a rousing Piano Concerto No. 5 in D, Movement 1. Sparky walked around the table while the men had seconds of Apfelstrudel, thanking the crew and making small talk. She bent down to the ear level with Erasmus and JB and whispered, "I see that neither of you touched your drinks tonight. Taking your job seriously, I see." She followed it with a polite smile, which the 2 men mirrored back. Kid all she wants, Erasmus thought, but we will not have another incident here in Salzburg. As the music ended, the crews started shuffling out to get a good night's sleep. Willie Dampf approached Sparky and offered getting a nightcap at the Striegelkeller. He said it was a bit of a walk up the hill to the fortress, but worth the effort. "When you say nightcap, don't you really mean beer?" she retorted. He smiled and said, "Of course, just a small one," and held his thumb and index finger to indicate a small thimble of brew. They both chuckled. Willie added, "I would like to have one of my crew come with us, Herr von Zeppelin." A very young, serious-looking, and well-dressed man stood up from the Iron Eagle's table and bowed to Sparky. Willie patted him on the back, saying, "He is a very promising young engineer, well worth the extra weight on the airship. Ha!" Sparky replied, "Well, of course," and wondered if a man of the age of 13 should be going to the Striegelkeller after dinner. JB turned to Erasmus. "I'll shadow the crew back to the airship. I'll watch Sparky," and then Erasmus added, "Stay safe." The parties went their separate ways. After a climb up the twisting footpath to the fortress, Erasmus found himself seated in a large beer hall with long-running communal tables and a sizable stein of beer in front of him. Sparky, Willie, and von Zeppelin went deep into conversation about airship piloting, defensive strategies, design trade-offs, and the topology of tomorrow's run. While Willie enjoyed a couple of steins, Sparky nursed a glass, and von Zeppelin had a low-alcohol variant of the local beer. Erasmus had plenty of time to look around the brewhouse. 2 tables over, he spotted Krasnaya Rubashka talking to someone, perhaps a local of Salzburg. They must have been friends from before, given the animated conversation and how exhilarated they were to see each other. They spoke Russian quickly and enthusiastically while toasting frequently. Russians. Erasmus continued scanning the room, keeping an eye on Sparky and Krasnaya Rubashka, but the evening continued to be uneventful. When Sparky finally drained her glass, she and Willie stood. She extended her hand for shaking, but Willie took it for kissing. Sparky quickly looked towards Erasmus, concerned about his reaction. She saw a raised eyebrow for a split second, then the solemn face of the man protecting her. All 4 of them proceeded down the path, away from the Holsten-Salzburg castle, and then to the airship grounds. They parted company quickly, given the hour and von Zeppelin's best attempts to appear a mature adult, and not an utterly exhausted boy. Neither Sparky nor Erasmus mentioned the hand-kissing incident during the ascent to the Birkenhaus Tower, although they were both thinking about it. And then another break. The singing of the early birds made sure that no one in any of the airships slept past daybreak. Despite the best efforts of Luis Miguel, few of the Birkenhaus crew were interested in breakfast, given the size of the meals of the previous night. By 9 o'clock, most of the carefully made mushroom and cheese omelets had been tossed to the same birds that woke the crew. The crew readied the airship for the second leg. JB and Erasmus traded tasks. JB followed Sparky and Krasnaya Rubashka to the pre-race rituals, and Erasmus stayed to guard the crew. Was he avoiding Sparky due to the polite hand kiss? He didn't want to ponder that too long. He had a crew to watch over. Erasmus first verified that everyone was on board, even Reginald Wallace. Reginald had retired directly back to his cabin after his light breakfast of tea and toast, and seemed to be nursing a hangover. Perhaps he was more worried about the outcome of this regatta than Erasmus would have expected. But it was not for Erasmus to worry about, or care about, for that matter. Owners of businesses seem to worry about everything all of the time, so Erasmus figured that Reginald was just sleeping in the bed that he had made for himself. And another break. Erasmus had taken most of the morning watching 6 crew members hard at work on the preparation of the boilers and steam engine. There were the usual activities of lubricating everything and verifying that the water taken on board was as pure as possible, as so not to clog the tubes between the boiler and the engine while under steam. Erasmus learned about the Birkenhaus' unique 2-boiler system. To maximize the power output, spherical boilers were used with high-temperature coal that was packed over 3/4 of the boiler's surface area. This provided a very fast-heating boiler, allowing the Birkenhaus to provide sudden bursts of speed, sprinting, if you will. But due to the size of the boiler, it would require more than 1 boiler's worth of steam to make it through a leg of the regatta. For this reason, a 2-boiler system was used. As soon as the second boiler was up to pressure, a steam transference switch could be thrown, allowing the steam engine a new power source in the blink of an eye. It also meant that new water could be introduced to the system without a loss of pressure by pouring it into the standby boiler. Spherical boilers also reduced the chance of a boiler explosion. A good thing. Erasmus marveled at the complexity of the system. Heat vents from the boilers directed wasted heat to the air in the envelopes, maintaining the heated, and therefore expanded, air in the gargantuan balloon that gave lift to the airship. The steam engine was a 2-stage piston-style mechanism that allowed the steam that exited the first set of pistons to be used to power the second set, taking full advantage of the power left in the steam. The ability to collect steam and send it back to the boilers was a possibility, but the additional tubes and coolers were too much additional weight for a racing vessel. To add to that reasoning, a closed pressure system required too much care and raised the risk of something going wrong. The waste steam from the engine was released into a spherical rubber-lined envelope that was allowed to fill, removed by hand and cooled. Then condensed water was poured into the standby boiler. Keeping all the power steam working was a full-time job for 3 or 4 of the crew, and for all 6 when they planned a boiler switchover. Just over the roar of the boiler fires, Erasmus could hear the bass drum and the bass horns of the band outside kick into a rousing march. He heard the scuffling of feet as Sparky, Krasnoyarubashka, and JB returned to the ship to prepare for launch. Erasmus left the engine compartment and went upstairs to check in on JB and snoop on Sparky. She had the look of a woman who desperately wanted to transition to a useful task. She had attended the pre-launch activities in her pilot's uniform, so she wouldn't have to change clothes. She immediately took to the helm and rattled off a list of pre-launch instructions to Krasnoyarubashka, who did his best to keep up with her. JB gave a full and overly formal report to Erasmus in about 25 seconds that boiled down to nothing of interest happening. In 20 short minutes, the Burke and Hare was on the starting line, carefully controlling its position. The common room directly behind the bridge held most of the non-crewing passengers, Wallace, JB, Aldrich, and Jake Friedmont, the referee Herr Finstermacher, Lord Ashley, and, taking a rare break from the galley, Luis Miguel Sevilla. The only non-crew missing was Virat, who was no doubt in one of Lord Ashley's cabin room performing the never-ending undertakings to keep his master's world in exemplary condition. The flurry of activity on the bridge was incredible. No fewer than 6 topographic charts lay on sideboards, held in place by clamps. Between the rapid conversations on the voice pipes to the engine room and the fast exchanges between Sparky and Krasnoyarubashka, it was clear to Erasmus that the intensity would be far greater for this run. From the bits and pieces of concentrated technical dialogue and complex gestures towards the various charts, Erasmus was able to gather that the airships had a good deal of freedom as to how they could get from the Salzburg starting line to the Innsbruck finishing line. However, it would be foolish to fly high and suffer the fickle mountain gales. It would be wiser to stay in the valleys, where the winds were more predictable in both strength and direction. For this reason, all of the airships were initially headed north. Sparky's strategy was to turn hard to port as soon as they cleared Monchberg Mountain and head west to cross over the town of Bad Reichenhall. From there, it would be rough going over the hilly terrain until passing over Kiefersfelden. That was the eastern end of the remaining valley run to Innsbruck. There were a number of route choices over the hilly area, but it came down to choosing between sprinting ahead or defensively blocking opponents from gaining a lead. The plan also rested on seeing what other airships were going to do tactically. So planning only allowed the Burke and Hare pilots an understanding of their options. Erasmus was startled out of his contemplation by the starting cannon. The steam engine roar, the thrust of the propeller, and the shouts from the crowd meant the race was on. Erasmus went back down to the engine room to see the activity that kept full power to a sprinting airship. It was inspirational to see the back-breaking effort to keep the muscles of such an athletic vessel running smoothly. Coal was shoveled. Water levels and pressures were checked every few seconds. Joints were lubricated. Vibrations were controlled. Steam exhaust bags were changed. Flap cables were checked for tension. Airflow ribbons were examined and reported back to the helm. Envelope pressure and stress were verified and compensated for. The 6 crew members were drenched in sweat, laboring to make sure that the craft literally flew off the starting line. Erasmus imagined that the crowd was staring up, pop-eyed, as the flying behemoths achieved top speed in a matter of minutes, and their shouts, turned to gasps of disbelief. Erasmus knew from the regatta briefs that this run was about 85 miles long, a good 14 miles longer than the flat run from Munich to Salzburg. That meant more water, coal, time, and stress. This was going to be a true test of the crew and the vessel. It was only minutes later that the Birkenheer banked around the Monchensberg mountain. Erasmus lost his balance and grabbed for the nearest rope hold. The crew all made a simple weight shift in their stance and continued their whirl of activity. Erasmus smiled at their talent and headed back upstairs to the common room. The airships had spread out as they headed across the flat plain to Bad Reichenhall. Despite the Birkenheer's best effort, it was still nose to nose with the other airships. They all had chosen the same altitude, approximately 200 feet up, where the winds were the most favorable. Looking forward, El Toro Rojo had taken the rightmost position, neighbored by Le Lapin, the Birkenheer in the middle, then the Iron Eagle, and on the far left was the north wind. From a race perspective, the Birkenheer was in a favorable position. To make headway on her required not only gaining ground, but also clearing enough to cut in front. And since she was in the middle, where she went, the others had to follow, or change altitude, or be disqualified by bumping airships. With all the airships under full steam, they skywrote a musical staff across the sky with their trails of water vapor at just under 80 miles per hour. Looming ahead past Bad Reichenhall were 3 side-by-side mountains, each with their peaks standing about 3,000 feet above the plain floor. Sparky's plan was to follow the Salich River to the valley between the left and middle mountain, limiting the amount of climbing required. The danger was that her plan would allow El Toro Rojo to take the rightmost valley and use their air-winch cannons without interference from the other airships. But at this clip, and given the upcoming terrain, the Birkenheer would be foolish to change to defense now. So on she pushed towards the leftmost valley. Just over Bad Reichenhall, Sparky saw El Toro Rojo fire its air-winch cannons. The 3 bundled sails sprang out ahead, trailing their lines behind them. The initial effort was to cause the Toro Rojo to lose about 15 feet off the rest of the pack from the force of firing the sails forward. All 3 lines suddenly went taut, and the umbrella-shaped sails opened fully. They must have changed the size of their sails overnight, since they were visibly larger than the day before. They were hauled back in at an astounding speed, thrusting El Toro Rojo forward. When the maneuver was completed, El Toro Rojo had gained half of a ship length on the rest of the airships. Sparky's initial impression was that this was a great deal of effort for such a small gain. But if properly timed, half an airship's length is the difference between a win and an also-ran. It was clear that El Toro Rojo wanted to get into the valley first, so they must have been shooting for the same valley as the Birkenheer. Sparky grabbed the voice pipe. "I need a high-head sprint. Double up on the boilers if you must. On my count. 3, 2, 1, now!" Erasmus saw both Sparky and Krasnyarvaska grab for the handholds, so he leapt to do the same. As fast as he thought the Birkenheer was going, the airship lurched forward, and Sparky dropped the nose to gain some additional speed through gravity. Although Rasmus had been standing, everyone else in the common room was sitting except Wallace, who landed on his rump. He was up fast enough, but with his hangover eliminated and his dignity slightly bruised. Although 30 feet lower than before, the Birkenheer was 10 feet in front of El Toro Rojo. Over the voice pipe, the echoey shouts from the engine room could be heard. "High-held sprint over in 3, 2, 1, done!" The airship slowed back down to the previous race speed, but she was in an excellent position. Transitioning into the valley was claustrophobic. Due to the close conditions, both Le Lapin and the Iron Eagle dropped back as so not to collide. Due to Sparky's maneuver, the Burke and Hare's envelope was now at the same altitude as El Toro Rojo's gondola, forcing it to have to gain altitude and lose a bit of speed. The north wind tried to stay abreast of the Burke and Hare as long as possible, but when the envelope was within 3 feet of the Burke and Hares, Herr Fenstermacher stood bravely on the port side catwalk and blew his whistle and waved off the encroaching north wind. Since the Burke and Hare had the lead, they had priority to proceed, and the other airships had to give way. Sparky smiled at their well-timed maneuver and let out a very American woohoo! Even with their lead, Sparky turned to Krasnaya Rubaska and stated, "The fact that the Iron Eagle didn't try to use their raw speed to take the lead means they must be purposely letting us do the rough front work while they wait to come up from behind. We need to watch them when the valley opens up." The formation remained through the narrow valley with the Burke and Hare in the lead, El Toro Rojo and the North Wind side by side behind, trailed by the Iron Eagle alongside of Le Lapin. Sparky pushed the tempo of the race, since the Burke and Hare was rather maneuverable. Krasnaya Rubaska found a very favorable wind at 180 feet, which was dangerously close to the minimum altitude for the leg of 150 feet above the ground. However, all of the ships were following her lead as close as they could without being called for drafting. The sharp right turn at the town of Laufer that went through the narrow pass made the Burke and Hare's gondola swing out to the port side, eliciting audible gasps from the common room. It was possible to see the individual goats grazing on the mountainsides, and that just seemed all too close for those who hadn't raced before. Sparky executed another hard right at the Kirchdorf in Tyrol, entering an even narrower valley to negotiate. The train of high-speed airships whipped through the passage, not a single one of them having the room to perform a pass. A hard left at Kosen, and the valley began to open up, giving breathing room to the brisk race. The town of Kefferfelsen was ahead, nestled in a junction of 3 major valleys. It was a major decision point for Sparky, since she had to decide whether to stay low and follow the prevailing current, or hug the mountains on her left and head into the next valley while forcing the north wind over and crowding out El Toro Rojo. It was riskier, but she decided to hug the mountains. Over the voice pipe, she asked, "Can I get another sprint here and save one for the finish?" "Not enough given the coal and water. Only 1 push left," was all the answer she got. "Krasnaya Rubaska, do you think we can hug that hillside and catch a favorable updraft?" "It's a big risk, but I will try." After that, Krasnaya Rubaska tightened his chin strap and rushed out onto the catwalk on the port side, holding on with one hand and sticking the other out over the side into the wind, feeling for a minor change while the airship flew ahead. Sparky leaned the ship over towards the hillside. The rules were clear on this. She could only fly so low, but she could get as close to the mountainside as she wished, as long as she didn't hit anything. Erasmus held his breath as they leaned closer and closer. Trees flew past. Sparky made the Burke and Hare climb a bit. The other airships weren't willing to go that close and were maneuvering around the mountain at a safer distance. Suddenly, Krasnaya Rubaska gave a thumbs up. Sparky tipped the nose of the Burke and Hare up and pulled the release for the horizontal sail. The Burke and Hare sprouted wings on each side that caught the updraft that it was riding over the sides of the mountain and lifted the ship. It felt like the airship was in another sprint, but it was gaining altitude and the pitch of the engine noise hadn't changed. It had a feeling of falling up and gaining forward speed. The pack of airships responded as Sparky had hoped. The north wind gave the mountain more room, forcing El Toro Rojo to swing wide around the turn. Le Lapin and the Iron Eagle did likewise. Krasnaya Rubaska fought his way back onto the airship and retook his place at the helm. looking amazingly wind-worn. With another release pull, the horizontal sails collapsed, retracted, and fastened to the sides of the airship's envelope. Coming into the final valley run, the Burke and Hare was an airship and a half ahead of the North Wind, which was now leading the El Toro Rojo. Le Lapin and the Iron Eagle were neck and neck, but bringing up the rear. There were only 2 more locations where the valley widened for the remainder of the route, at the town of Kirchbaikal and at Innsbruck itself. Erasmus thought if Sparky could maintain her lead through Kirchbaikal, she could sprint her way to the finish. Within a minute of gaining the lead to the corner, the town of Kirchbaikal came into view. That's when it happened. The Iron Eagle turned up its engines and flanked El Toro Rojo, obviously with the plan to not only gain the lead, but to also block another use of their air winch cannons. El Toro Rojo responded by dropping down quickly to keep a clear passage ahead. With the Iron Eagle out of the way, and El Toro Rojo dropped down, Le Lapin earned its name in a half-minute dash that gained 50-foot climb in a sprint over the top of El Toro Rojo. They gained a full half airship length and legally began their descent, side by side with the Burke and Hare. But it was too late. The command to fire the air winch cannons had already been given. The top middle cannon shot its umbrella sail right into the back of Le Lapin, ripping a giant hole in the back of its envelope, deploying the canopy inside Le Lapin's envelope, and tangling the attached rope into the French airship's series of 3 propellers. At first, the spinning propellers pulled El Toro Rojo towards the entangled airship. As soon as the rope went fully taut, Le Lapin's main propeller suddenly stopped rotating. Its steam engine seized, and a loud popping echoed throughout the valley. All of the racing crews knew that noise. It was the breaking of the mechanical components under high pressure. A specialty release valve instantly fired within the heart of Le Lapin, and the scalding steam billowed out of the sails of the damaged airship. With the steam from Le Lapin pouring over its sides of Burke and Hare, Sparky took the airship hard to port to escape damage. But for the rest of the regatta, with the disabled Le Lapin in front of them, this created an instant airship traffic jam. The Iron Eagle had to climb rapidly over Le Lapin, while the North Wind turned sideways in an attempt to stop as quickly as possible, swinging their gondola back and forth in a manner that would have made a strong man's stomach flip over. But El Toro Rojo got the worst of it. The ropes from the cannons were made to be reeled back in, but there was no easy way to cut them loose. With the top cannon line attached to an airship that had a punctured envelope, they both lost altitude quickly. Erasmus knew it would be foolish for the envelopes to be one giant bag of hot air. Ironically, this accident was an interesting way to learn how these structures were segmented. Apparently, Le Lapin had a 3-segment approach that allowed for one of the segments to be completely pierced and the other 2 to gently lower it to the ground. That is, unless it was tethered to another airship. Le Lapin hung by its tail, tipped at a 30-degree angle, nose down. El Toro Rojo was now supporting a heavier-than-air object by a line connected to the top of its envelope, twisting El Toro Rojo sideways and forcing its gondola up to the starboard side. That way. But no whistles were blown, so the Burke and Hare rushed on. The Iron Eagle had slowed its progress, but then rushed forward at full speed. The North Wind was less fortunate. It had to come to a full stop, gain altitude, which was very time-consuming given that they were in a regatta, and then restart their race to the finish. The regatta was now quite spread out through the final valley run. The Burke and Hare was 2 airship lengths ahead of the Iron Eagle, and the North Wind trailed by half a mile. Sparky shouted back to Erasmus, "Is everyone on board safe and sound?" JB and Erasmus sprinted off to check on those who weren't in plain sight. JB ran to Lord Ashley's cabin to verify that Virat was not injured, and Erasmus sprinted downstairs. Both returned reporting no casualties, although the sudden turn to avoid disaster surprised even the veteran crew. By the time Innsbruck was in sight, the Iron Eagle had gained on the Burke and Hare and was one airship length behind. The Anticipation was Sparky's enemy. She didn't want to lose another leg to bad timing after leading most of the race. Gospodin Krasnaya Baska, you choose the time for the sprint. Me? Gashbaya Dr. Drake McTrowell? If you order it so, I will do. The co-pilot took a mental triangulation on the nearby landmarks of mountains, steeples, and the Finnish line flags. He knew that the Burke and Hare had about 20 seconds of sprint in her. Over the voice pipe, he shouted, I please need a high-head sprint. On my count. 3, 2, 1, now! Sparky hung on to the pilot's handholds, but looked out the starboard side window to see the Iron Eagle's sprint that had brought the nose of their ship up even to the window of the Burke and Hare's bridge, and she smiled. The Burke and Hare lunged forward, and the nose of the Iron Eagle retreated as the band below struck up a lively tune, marking the finish of the second leg. The Burke and Hare had finished first. Reginald Wallace let out a woo-hoo, but everyone knew he just wasn't doing it right. But that was okay. It was for all the right reasons. Erasmus looked at Sparky and she at him, and they smiled, and he thought, what a woman, what a woman. Well, that ends the Valley Run.
Jeez, that was exciting.
Yeah. We've been reading the Bavarian Airship Regatta for Corona Storytime. The next reading is The Mountain Run.
Dun dun dun!
Stay tuned for next time.